Okay guys, today we're going to be taking another look at Bitcoin and see what's been going on with the recent price action of BTC. So here we are on the daily chart, and here we can obviously see that Wyckoff accumulation. This is something that we've been talking about for a little while on the channel, and obviously what we think we are likely to get into. Now the first thing I want to kind of clear up is obviously lots of people talking about we should have had the spring. We're actually in phase C of this accumulation. Wyckoff, and ultimately, guys, this is actually not quite the case because the spring would be the third lowest low, and actually what we see here is actually only two, right? So you actually see the selling climax, but then see the secondary test in phase B, but we haven't actually gone lower than that secondary test in phase B, and we can see that because obviously the spring is going to be lower. So right now what we can see here is actually we have on our way down from our Wyckoff distribution at the top here, coming down to our selling climax. There were a couple of wicks that came down here, but they never went any lower than our selling climax, so we know these are not the secondary test in phase B, because secondary test in phase B is lower than the selling climax, and therefore we haven't actually dropped down lower than the selling or secondary test in phase B, which would be a spring. So ultimately what you see here, guys, is actually that we're in phase B, not phase C. At least is how I look at the chart. And again, this is Bitcoin on the daily using Binance as the data source, so feel free to go ahead and try to draw this up yourselves. Now ultimately what you see here is I've drawn two different variations to the Wyckoff accumulation because there are many different variations and it's not just one pattern and that's it. Ultimately there's lots of different kind of variations to it, but ultimately I've drawn the two main ones here that I wanted to really kind of talk to you guys about because it goes in two different directions. And ultimately, because this is all about institutions and institutions manipulating the price of a stock, or in this case, Bitcoin, ultimately there's a choice to be made by the institutions once we get partway through phase B. And this is all about whether or not there's loads of long positions or loads of short positions, at least in my opinion. What you tend to find here is actually if there's loads of long positions out there and people are thinking, okay, this is the last kind of call before you go off up into phase E, for example, then ultimately what you'll find is that the institutions will push the price down into a spring situation, a lower low here. It's lower than the secondary test in phase B. And that'll be if there's loads of long positions, more longs than there are shorts, okay? If, however, at this point in here, where I think was more likely going to happen, guys, is ultimately that loads of people will be thinking Bitcoin's going down, potentially to 20k, 15k, there'll be a load of short positions. And once institutions know that there's a load of short positions here for BTC, in fact, they won't be a spring situation. They'll push the price up into this other variation, liquidating those short positions out of the market, and then going up into phase D and E. So there's two ways that this kind of plays out in my mind. And they kind of mirror each other, right? Ultimately, if there's a load of long positions, you'll see a spring, and if there's loads of short positions, you'll go up into phase C up here rather than going down into a spring situation. So for us right now, understanding that spring would be lower than the secondary test in phase B and that we haven't actually had anything go lower than our selling climax, that puts us kind of firmly right back in this phase B situation, and we look forward to either a spring situation or a slight variation to that where it mirrors it in the opposite direction. So right now, where are we? Well, we had the pullback a little bit lower than I originally thought. I thought we'll go down to about 32, and that I thought 32,200. And we actually went down a little bit lower, but not as low as our selling climax. And that's an important thing just to note here. We are still technically still fine within this this structure. Had we actually dropped below that selling climax, that would have potentially mean that something else going on here, and I'd have to take a bit of a deeper look. Now this obviously got very, very close, but right now we are moving back up, and the expectations here is this correction that we were talking about three days ago. Ultimately, we are still calling for this 40k target. Now, if we do go up there to that 40k target, that means this structure is more than likely definitely something that we're going to be seeing. If, however, we do continue to dabble down here and potentially go lower than our selling climax, then I have to reconsider our position here as to what is going on. And maybe we haven't actually had that full secondary test, or maybe we actually need to look at this on a lower time frame to see whether or not the spring situation is actually already occurring here with people going long, and actually they've just accelerated this up, because ultimately phase A, B, C, D, and E can happen very, very fast. It could be a 4-week period, right? And we've been down here for quite some time. So we'll have to see if that kind of plays out. For Bitcoin at the moment, it is doing kind of, I was expecting yesterday's candle to where it was. Today's is a little bit of a surprise. I thought we would be kind of bubbling around this area. which we are, guys. I think we're about 31k at the minute. The weekends are going to be the hardest thing to kind of gauge. My expectations are that we will eventually kind of go up to this 40k area here before we have this major kind of pullback before going in one of two directions, right? The spring situation or a potential better situation for many of the hodlers out there. So right now where we are is a bit of an unknown. We'll have to see how this one continues, but my expectations will be that tomorrow will be no different, being the weekend, and then ultimately I think going into Monday we'll see some interesting stuff going forward and maybe heading towards that 40k target. But of course, if that doesn't happen and we get a break of this structure below that selling climax, we'll obviously have to reassess the situation and see what's going on. I know lots of people are talking about Bitcoin going down to 20k, retesting 24. These are of course possibilities. I find them lower on the probability scale, however, than what's actually in front of us right now. So again, if we do break that selling climax and potentially go lower than the secondary test in phase B, I'll be addressing what's going on the shorter time frames to see whether or not we've actually accelerated into a spring situation. And obviously what would go on from here would be going into a sign of strength and then going on out. Now, I don't think it's going to be that quick, so we'll have to see how this one plays out. I still think we're quite a few weeks into this thing. Another 4 weeks or so should see us through. So we'll have to see how that goes. So let's go pull this down into our hourly chart. And the things that's really interesting here is there's not too much room to fall down into. And this is just because we are really low on our relative strength index. Right, so we're at 41. We've been oversold a few times here, and ultimately what we're looking for is to basically try to bring this nice and low and get some good volume. Now the volume seems to be the problem, and this is a weekend situation as well. And again, you can see it within the sentiment. Right, we have large selling pressure, the price being forced to the downside. We can see that whilst retail investors are buying up around these key resistance areas, and the volumes are actually decreasing. So we know the sentiment is still quite fearful in the space. Not many people want to be buying up here, and there's a key individuals, probably institutions, buying at key levels. And we know that 31k is the area that Tesla bought, for example. So when we're having this pullback down towards our 30k area, this is clearly a buy zone for many institutions. So where we are is bobbing around here, not many people buying it up and not in much volume. And again, that is something that you find quite a bit when you have these institutions buying. Now, the other thing that's obviously coming out here is obviously the hash rates drop down significantly. That's going to have a bit of an impact as well. So we're in for a bit of a rocky ride. I think we're going to continue to be a bit of sideways in this kind of area for the next few hours into tomorrow. And I think ultimately we'll go into Monday in a bit of a stronger position. We'll be nice and low on this relative strength index. And the main thing that we want to hold is this basically this area here, the selling climax area. We're looking to hold that. If we can hold that, then we should be in a good position on Monday to get some decent trading behind Bitcoin and to move it into July in a strong way. So again, we're looking to just reduce that relative strength index a little bit and see if we can get an increase and some sentiment change and shift when it comes to Bitcoin. Now, there are some interesting news articles coming out for Bitcoin, so I'll leave that to Chris to kind of cover off. But from a technical point of view here, what we can see is a structure that's still intact, although it's getting close to being broken. We'll have to monitor this to see if our expectations of 40k do come in shortly, because if it's an accelerated path, that should be something that we should see relatively soon. And then obviously from here, we'll have to see and assess the situation later on. Now, of course, if this gets broken down, then we'll be reassessing the situation of all of these structures altogether and to see actually, are we likely to go ahead and retest that 24k area? And again, retesting 24k does not mean that the bull run is over, but it does definitely mean that we're in a prolonged bearish situation for a while yet. Ultimately, this Wyckoff accumulation would potentially actually draw an end to a bit of a bear phase or the wave 4 correction. And again, going down to 24k doesn't necessarily support a fourth wave scenario for Bitcoin. So when we start thinking about Wyckoff, it actually fits to the narrative on some of the macro pictures as well. Going down to 24 does mean that we have to reassess quite a lot of information here to see exactly what the next likely outcome is going to be for Bitcoin. Ultimately, there's still so much information out there to say that we're very bullish going into the second half of this year and seeing significant amounts of value added to Bitcoin. So for now, we are in this kind of short time frame, looking at the daily, looking at the hourly, seeing some pretty interesting things. But going forward in a part of the macro picture, 1, 2, 3 months from now, things will definitely be in a different phase, and will be interesting to see how the narratives are all shifting and changing and adapting to that. So guys, hopefully you have found this useful and informative. If you you have, then do go ahead and hit that like button for me. I really appreciate it. And of course, if you're new, do go ahead and subscribe. By subscribing, you'll be kept up to date with everything we do here. It is free, you'll stay well informed, so why not? With that said, done and out of the way, I hope you have a fantastic day, and I'll catch you all in the next one.